He had been through mortar fire in Fallujah, had carried a wounded brother on his back through 3 miles of open desert, had stood at the graves of men he loved, and somehow found the strength to walk away from those graves and keep living. Thomas Calloway had survived all of it, but nothing, not one moment in 22 years of military service had prepared him for the silence of a house that used to hold someone and now held only the memory of her. He stood in the doorway of the bedroom on the morning of his 3rd wedding anniversary, holding a mason jar of wildflowers he had picked himself before sunrise, and understood with a slow and terrible clarity that she was gone. Not out for a walk, not at the store. Gone the way people go when they have made a decision they have been building toward for a long time and have finally, quietly, acted on it. He set the wildflowers on the dresser and stood there for a long moment without moving. The room smelled like her perfume, faint and fading, the way a candle smells after it has just been blown out. Her side of the closet was open, a row of empty hangers. Her travel bag, the brown leather one she had carried on every trip they had ever taken together, was missing from the shelf. He noticed these things one at a time, the way a man trained to assess situations notices details, calmly and in order, even when every part of him is breaking. On the nightstand, her wedding ring sat in a small ceramic dish she kept there. It caught the morning light. Thomas looked at it for a long time. Then he walked to the kitchen, poured himself a cup of coffee, and sat down at the table where he had eaten breakfast with her for 3 years. He had known something was wrong for months. A man who has spent decades reading people, reading rooms, reading silences, reading the space between what is said and what is meant, does not miss the signs forever. He had noticed the way her laughter had changed around the edges, the way she held her phone differently, the way she sometimes looked at him across the dinner table with an expression he could not name but recognized as distance. He had told himself it was a season, that marriages moved through seasons, that patience was the answer. He had loved her patiently for 3 years. He had loved her through her moods and her silences and her long stretches of coldness that she never explained and he never pressed her on, because he believed that love did not demand explanations. He believed that showing up, day after day, in the quiet and unglamorous ways, the coffee left warming, the bills paid, the repairs made, the listening done, was what love actually looked like when it was real. His phone buzzed on the table. A photograph, posted publicly on a social account he had not known she maintained, tagged by someone named Brianna Walsh, who appeared to be a mutual friend he had never met. Margaret, standing outside a lakeside cabin somewhere in the mountains, her hair loose the way she only wore it on vacations, smiling a smile Thomas had not seen directed at him in over a year. She was leaning into a man named Derek Holloway with the ease of someone who had done that exact thing 1,000 times before. And she had. Thomas knew that. Derek Holloway had been the man before him, the man Margaret had dated for 4 years, the man she had called her great love before she had called him that, the man who had ended things with her suddenly and without explanation 2 years before Thomas had walked into her life. She had told Thomas all of it in the early days of their relationship, crying in the passenger seat of his truck one night, saying she was finally over it, finally ready. Thomas had believed her. He had been honored to be the man she healed with. He had not understood until this moment that healing with someone and choosing someone are not always the same thing. The caption beneath the photograph read, "3 years was too long to pretend." Thomas put the phone face down on the table. He sat with both hands around his coffee cup and a morning light coming through the kitchen window and the absolute stillness of a house that had become, overnight, too large for one person. He thought about the reservation he had made at Carver's, the restaurant where they had eaten on their first real date 7 years ago.
He thought about the letter in the inside pocket of his jacket, 3 handwritten pages he had finished at the kitchen table 2 nights ago while she slept, every word chosen carefully, every sentence an attempt to reach across the distance that had grown between them and remind her that he was still there, still trying, still choosing her. He pressed his hand flat against his chest where the letter was and closed his eyes. This was not the first time Derek Holloway had taken her. That was the part that sat the heaviest. 4 months into their marriage, Thomas had been away for a military consultation in Virginia, 10 days, the last work trip he ever took. Margaret had disappeared for a weekend. She had told him afterward that she had needed space, that she had driven to the coast alone, that the distance had scared her and she was sorry. He had accepted that. He had come home and held her and said he understood, because he had wanted to understand, because the alternative, that the woman he had built his life around was already retreating towards someone else, was a truth too heavy to carry at the beginning of a marriage.
He had set it down, he had kept walking, he had loved her forward because he did not know how to love any other way. He called Calvin Brooks at 8 in the morning. Calvin was retired Navy, had been Thomas's closest friend since they had met at a Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall in Portland 11 years ago over bad coffee and a shared silence that had somehow become one of the most reliable friendships of Thomas's life. Calvin answered on the first ring, which meant he had already seen the photograph. "I'm on my way," Calvin said. "You don't have to." "Thomas." A pause. "I'm on my way." He arrived 20 minutes later with 2 containers of coffee from the diner on Birch Street and said nothing for the first half hour. They sat on the back porch in the cool September air and watched the yard, and Calvin let the silence do what silence does between men who trust each other enough not to fill it with noise. After a while, Thomas said, "She left her ring." Calvin nodded slowly. "She left it in the dish on the nightstand, like it was a hotel key." Another silence. Then Calvin said, "What are you going to do?" Thomas looked at the garden along the back fence, the tomatoes still coming in red along the vine, the herbs he had planted in early spring that had grown beyond what he had expected. He had put real work into that garden, early mornings before Margaret was awake, because he had believed that the things you tend with patience are the things that last. He said, "I'm going to let her go. I've been holding on to something that wasn't there anymore, maybe wasn't fully there for a while." He exhaled slowly. A man can only carry a marriage by himself for so long before he has to put it down. Calvin looked at him carefully. "You sure you're all right?" "No," Thomas said honestly, "but I will be." Margaret called on the 4th day. Thomas was in the backyard pulling weeds from the garden when his phone rang, and he looked at her name on the screen for a long moment before answering. Her voice was careful and quiet, the voice of someone who has rehearsed what they planned to say and then, at the last moment, lost the script. "Thomas, I owe you more than I gave you." "Yes," he said, "you do." A long silence. "Derek and there was always something unfinished there. I tried to leave it behind. I wanted to leave it behind." "But you didn't." "No." Her voice broke slightly. "I'm sorry. I know that's not enough." Thomas stood in the garden with the phone against his ear and the late afternoon sun across his shoulders and the smell of soil and tomato plants around him. He thought about the man he had been before her, the soldier, the quiet one, the man who gave everything he had to whatever he committed to. He thought about the man he had tried to be inside that marriage, patient, steady, present in every way he knew how to be. He did not regret being that man. He only regretted believing it would be enough to make her stay when her heart had never fully arrived. "Margaret," he said quietly, "I hope you find what you're looking for. I genuinely do. But I need you to understand something." He paused. "I am not going to spend the rest of my life being the place someone returns to when things fall apart.
I deserve someone who shows up for me the way I showed up for you, and I'm going to find that. Or I'm going to be all right alone. Either way, I'm going to be all right." She was crying softly by the time he finished. He let her cry without filling the silence. Then he said goodbye, clearly and with kindness, and ended the call. That evening, he took the letter from his jacket pocket and sat with it at the kitchen table for a long time. He read every word he had written, every careful, honest, loving sentence, and when he finished, he folded it slowly, carried it to the back porch, and placed it in the small metal bowl he kept for kindling. He struck a match. He watched the paper catch and curl and release, the words rising as smoke into the cool night air, and he felt something loosen in his chest that had been held tight for longer than he could name. Not bitterness, not anger, something closer to release, the kind that only comes when you finally stop trying to hold together something that has already come apart. Calvin came by the next morning, and they drank coffee on the porch again, and after a comfortable silence, Calvin asked, "So what now?" Thomas looked out at the garden, at the fence he had been meaning to repair for 2 seasons, at the yard that was his and would remain his. "Fix the fence," he said.
"Call my sister in Bozeman. Drive out there maybe in October." He wrapped both hands around his cup. "Tend to the things I let go while I was too busy trying to save something that didn't want to be saved." Calvin smiled at that. A small, real smile. "Sounds like a plan." "It's a start," Thomas said. The morning light came through the elm trees and fell across the porch in long, quiet lines, and Thomas Calloway sat in it without flinching, without looking back down the road behind him, without anything in his chest except the steady, unhurried certainty of a man who has survived hard things before and knows, not from hope but from experience, that the life still ahead of him is worth every quiet, faithful step it takes to reach it. Some men fall apart when love walks out the door. Thomas Calloway simply opened a window and let the morning in. If this story reached something inside you, if you know what it means to love someone with everything you have and still watch them choose someone else, then you are exactly who this channel was made for. Subscribe to the Kind Soul Stories. Every week we bring you another story about the people who carry the most and say the least. Hit that bell so you never miss a single one. These stories are for you. This story carries deep and lasting value for older American audiences. It honestly portrays the emotional experience of a veteran returning to civilian life and investing his greatest discipline, loyalty, patience, and quiet strength into a marriage that could not hold him. It models healthy emotional processing, showing that grief and self-respect are not opposites, and that a man can be heartbroken without being destroyed. It addresses the painful reality of loving someone who remains emotionally unfinished with a previous relationship, a situation millions of viewers will recognize from their own lives. It affirms that walking away with dignity is not defeat, but an act of profound self-respect. And it reminds its audience, particularly older men and women who have quietly sacrificed for relationships that did not reciprocate, that it is never too late to choose yourself, tend your own garden, and begin again.